Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Usagi Podjimbo podcast. I'm your host, Mike, and we will be getting into this episode very quickly. But first, I just want to say thanks for listening. And if you're enjoying the podcast, you want to help the podcast grow, the easiest way to do so is to rate and review our podcast on whatever podcast platform you're on and tell your friends. Let us know how we're doing. Give us feedback. You can find me at Usagi Podjimbo, Usagi Yojimbo podcast on Facebook. We have about 50 members strong on the Facebook page right now. But we are getting into the conclusion to this epic tale that is Circles. And this is Circles Chapter 4, Closing the Circle. And our story starts out with Usagi waiting in the forest, in a bamboo forest. He happens to hear somebody walking down the road, and he happens to see Mariko. And Mariko says, "Hello, Usagi." And she says, "Thank you for meeting me. And Usagi is like, I got your message. For a while, I thought there that you didn't really want to see me. And it's been 2 weeks. And, Usagi's like, oh, yeah, He's like, oh, how is Jotaro? Usagi says. And she's like, oh, Mariko's like, oh, Jotaro is doing well. He's okay. It seems you two have been getting really close. And Usagi happens to say, yes, he is a terrific child. And Mariko agrees, bowing her head and her eyes closed with a very somber look on her face. And she happens to say, Usagi, I want you to leave. And Usagi is very shocked by this. He's like, leave, Usagi says. But I journeyed home to stay. And Mariko's like, I'm sorry, but no, you can't stay. And Usagi's confused look on his face turns to somewhat anger. And he happens to say, is it because of Kenichi? And, and Mariko says, he doesn't know I'm meeting you. But yes, it is because of him. It is also because of me. And it's because of you. But mostly it's because of Jotaro. And Usagi's like, Jotaro, I don't understand what's going on. And Mariko says, please. She's has her hand over her face, and she's like, please do not make me explain. This is very difficult. You must go. And Usagi says, you asked me to leave, but you refuse to give me a reason? I don't understand that. What's Mariko's plan here? And she says she spills the beans. She spilled the beans, and I finally, what I've been thinking. I mean, I've already read this, but what I was thinking before has come to pass. Just saying. Mariko spills the beans. She spills the tea, and she says Jotaro is not really Kenichi's son. He is actually your son. Dun dun dun. So Usagi is taken back, and he's like, Jotaro, my son. And this is where Mariko cuts Usagi off. He's like, you remember the last picnic we had, Usagi? And he's like, how could I forget? Well, after that picnic, you left. Kenichi asked me to marry him. I told him I was carrying your child, but he persisted. Kenichi's a good man. He persisted. And Usagi says, when I found out you were going to marry soon after I left, Usagi's heart was broken. But if you would have sent word, I would have dropped everything he says, and he would basically come back. And Mariko shuts him down. He's like, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't have done that to you. We are both samurai. You have your duty to your lord, and I have my duty to the village itself. And Mariko goes on to say, though Jotaro is the child of his bitterest rival, Kenichi couldn't be a better father. He truly loves Jotaro, and Jotaro loves him. And Usagi says, how do you feel about this? To Mariko. And Mariko says, please do not make me choose between you and my family. Kenichi is my husband, and I will protect him and my son against you, Usagi. So Mariko is willing to go down with the ship. We've known this. Mariko, she will do whatever it takes to protect her family. Minus Usagi. Usagi is not part of her family, even though Jotaro, technically, his son, and Usagi is her baby daddy, you know? Um, but Usagi, don't you see your staying here will shatter their bonds of father and son? Which, yeah, I do wholeheartedly agree with that statement. It would definitely shatter things if you're you grew up with this one person who you thought was your father, and bam, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Your dad shows up. It shatters your entire world. It's happened to people all the time, and in the actual world. And Usagi says, "What do you mean?" And this is what Mariko says. Mariko says, "While you were out fighting wars, Kenichi was here as Jotaro grew. He helped him. He helped him, showed him the lore of the mountains, nursed him through sickness, encouraged him in his discovery, and taught him what it actually means to be a samurai's son." Mariko says Kenichi is Jotaro's father, not you, Usagi. Forgive me, Usagi, but right now, right or wrong, that's how I feel. And they kind of keep walking. And Usagi talks about how Kenichi actually saved his life. He could have left him to die, but he did not leave him to die, and he saved him. And no one could have known, or that what if Kenichi did leave Usagi to die? No one would have known if Usagi would have actually died. But it turns out Kenichi would have known. Kenichi is so honor bound to the people he had in his services. He was a leader too. Even Usagi in this little small scenario that they were in, he would have known, and he would have had to deal with the burden of knowing that he let Usagi die, even though Usagi risked his life to save Kenichi's son. So Kenichi would have to live with that burden, to say the least. As Mariko and Usagi continue to talk, Usagi says, he mentioning Kenichi, he is an excellent leader and noble successor to my father. Because if you don't remember, Usagi's father led the town at one point, but then he passed away. I see that now. Usagi is letting the burden of his rivalry with Kenichi go to the wayside. And is trying to do what is right in this scenario. I feel like, and Usagi says, as I feel like he's crying on the inside. I'm gonna be honest. He's like, so I enjoy my wandering life. I might be difficult to actually stay. So he's trying to justify not staying. I feel like, and make everything just a little better. But I don't think things are gonna be better. I've got to be honest. Usagi says he'll be back one day, and Mariko says, "I wish you would. My heart, it does my heart good to see you," she says, "though it saddens me as well." So there is very much like a thing between Mariko and Usagi. They're very much, I want to say, like star-crossed lovers, and they do what they gotta do. It's very much like the impossible romance, uh, which Mariko doesn't want to leave her family for Usagi, and Usagi doesn't want to break up Mariko's family for just to be together. It seems like. And when Usagi says, "Well, it's time to go," and Mariko says, "The days are shorter. It's best if you travel." Down to South Road through the mountains and trees. It's this good time of year. And Usagi's like, "Oh, I remember doing that. And he happens to say, while getting ready to leave Mariko, he's like, "Mariko, our lives could have been different." And Mariko replies with, "Such was not our karma, Usagi." And that's where they end it. And we see later on Usagi walking through the forest, and we hear somebody off to the side, up in a tree. We hear, "Oh, it's about time," And Usagi's like, "Oh, Jotaro, it's you. What are you doing here?" And Jotaro is like, you must have been thinking hard, Uncle Usagi. You passed by without even seeing me, he says. My mom said, this is what Jotaro said. My mom said, you would be leaving soon, and I should go down this road to say goodbye to you. She also gave me some rice balls to give to you. And he hands Usagi the rice balls, and Usagi picks them up. And Jotaro asks Usagi, "Are you leaving, Uncle Usagi? Because I've been a lot of trouble." And Usagi's like, "Of course not." He kneels down to Jotaro's eye level. He's like, "Of course not. I was never one to stay in one place," he says, "but I'll be back one day." And Jotaro gets really excited. He's like, "Yeah, I hope so too." And they hear something rustling in the bushes. And we hear Jotaro say, "Oh, there you are." We see Jotaro go up to the bushes and bend over, and he hands out a rice ball. And we hear a eep eep from the bushes, and something pops up. It's the Tokage that actually saved Jotaro in the previous issue. And Jotaro tells Usagi, this is the Tokage that rescued me. I'm going to keep him as a pet. And Jotaro seems to love this little Tokage. And he asks Usagi, "Hey, did you ever have a pet?" And he's like, "Yeah, I did a long time ago. Opening up those wounds, Stan Sakai. Just saying." And Usagi tells Jotaro that, yeah, he had a pet. And his name was Spot. Or sorry, he's like, "I've named him. His name is Spot. That's a good name." And Usagi says, I think that's actually a really wonderful name. To come full circle, Spot originally died at the end of the Dragon Bellow conspiracy. Luckily, we have a new Spot for a new generation of little junior Usagi Jotaro, which is cool. I like that. It hit me right in the feels because Spot was such a cool character, and to see them sort of bring Spot back in a different way was like marvelous, I have to say. Jotaro continues to say that his dad says that he can actually leave in a couple years and become part of the school that he was a part of, the Dogra school, the fencing school. They were the rivals to Usagi's Katsuichi's school. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's cool," Usagi says, "but are you ready to seek out? When you're ready, you should seek out the old hermit of the mountains, Katsuichi Sensei. He will teach you well." And Jotaro's like, "Oh yeah, that was your teacher, wasn't it, Uncle Usagi?" He's like, I'll find him." And Jotaro's like kind of jumping around, waving around his stick. He's like, "You're the best swordsman I know. I want to handle a sword just like you, Uncle Usagi." And this is where we get a little lesson where we see Usagi teaching Jotaro the sword is not just to fight people, but remember, the keenest blade are those that are kept in the scabbard, because it's always, you don't necessarily want to kill anybody, you know, just knock them out with the scabbard. No, just kidding. You don't really do that. And Jotaro's like, "What do you mean?" And Usagi says, you'll know eventually. It took me years to understand before I fully understood what that actually meant, and you will do the same." And Usagi and Jotaro walk off in the distance. They say their goodbyes. Jotaro says, "It's getting late. I better go home." And he's like, "No worries, and they kind of have this really nice embrace where Jotaro says goodbye to Uncle Usagi. He'll miss him. And Usagi says, "I'll miss you too." And they wave goodbye with Spot going off in the distance with Jotaro. And he says, "Take care." And we have this really, really sombering moment where Usagi just says goodbye. And he just leaves it with that. He doesn't tell Jotaro that he is his father. He just leaves, and it's a very sombering moment, I would have to say, and that's where our story ends. Just to clarify, this story, I'm going to speak of this story in particular, but like this story as a whole is my favorite Usagi Yojimbo like long format story. For a lot of reasons, I feel like it honestly gives Kenichi, Mariko, Usagi, even Jotaro, I would say, layers. And that's one thing that Stan Sakai does seems to do very effortlessly, in my personal opinion. Um, Gives Usagi layers because Usagi was willing to just give everything up. When he found out Jotaro was his son, he was gonna drop everything, I feel like, and just go and be his dad. But in hindsight's not it's 2020, but I don't think he really saw it at first. But Jotaro does have a dad. Usagi might be his biological father, but Kenichi was there, just like Mariko said. Um, Many people can be an actual father, and I very much, I very much bonded with this story. I would say because I myself am a father. I myself am a single father to a young girl, and I very much identify with Usagi in the fact that I once was told to give up the child and just go off on my merry way. So I identify with that aspect, but I also identify with Mariko as well. Uh, Being there for the child and whatnot. But yeah, this is a whew, man. This particular issue fucking wrecked me so hard. There's like no action in it whatsoever. It's just dialogue. It's just dialogue, and it's done very well. And it just hit me. It hit me really hard, and it's one of my favorites personally, to say the least. And this isn't the end. This is not the end for Usagi and Jotaro. We will see them in many more stories together. Some in pretty big ones later down the road. But it's a fair question to ask. Does Jotaro know? And is he just playing dumb? Because I haven't gotten to this part. I'm just my uh uh like. Does Jotaro know that Usagi is actually his father? That's something that I really want to know, and I haven't gotten to in reading Usagi Saga yet. But that's something I want to know. Like, do they know? Like, does each other know? Does is like I say also props to Kenichi. Props to Kenichi because most men would not be like, oh yes, let me stick around and I'll play pretend with and I'll pretend to be his dad. Most men would not do that. I feel like, and it says a lot to Kenichi's character in that aspect to be like, yeah, I will take this kid, I will raise him as my own, regardless if he's not blood. Um, but yeah, I do feel like a little bit. Just gonna say this. Even though I kind of agree with Mariko, I feel like she was a little selfish, and she didn't let Jotaro know that Usagi is his actual father. And Usagi could have went off uh, with that. Yeah, they have. I mean, they look exactly alike. Like Kenichi is more of like a brown rabbit, but I guess you could say Jotaro got all of his looks from his mom. But I mean, Jotaro and Usagi are like almost identical, I would say. Uh, I feel like this could be an episode of like Maury, like, oh, who's the father type of thing. But yeah, it is what it is. It's a very sad ending. We're going to be moving on to the next issue later on. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. Let me know what you think, because I really enjoyed it. I did. Uh, it saddens me to know that Usagi doesn't get to get that part of his life. he doesn't get to settle down like he wanted to. He doesn't get a family, and he just gets left alone, which is so sad to think about. Uh, Usagi is alone, wandering the world, and he has to wonder if Jotaro and Mariko and even Kenichi are safe and sound and happy. Things are going well for them. And yeah, that's where we're going to end it. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed this particular issue. They dropped the bomb on us, Stan Sakai. You dropped the bomb on us in this issue. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Thanks for listening. And I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Peace out, stay safe, and go read some Usagi Yojimbo.